Now that we've learned about basic looping, and we have learned about for loops and how useful they are with looping through information or repetitive tasks or data where we know how many times we should loop, as well as potentially the length of the list of data that we have, we need to learn about the while loop. Now, what the while loop is really good at is it is really good at taking a condition, which is totally set up and managed by you as the developer, and just checking it each time before it loops to verify that the condition still is true, telling the loop to continue looping. So with that, let's jump into the while loop and see how it is really good when we have a condition that might change any time during our loop and is not necessarily based upon a counter and an increment that is managed by the loop. Instead, it's handled by an external value and then us doing something inside of the loop to modify that external value until a condition is met. So what we're going to do is we are going to still use a counter as the external value, but I'm going to show you how the modifications to that counter actually has to happen in the while loop and you're in control of it. Whereas in a for loop, the for loop was in control of it. So let's head and jump into a while loop. So the syntax for a while loop is simply the keyword while, as you could probably have guessed, and then some kind of an expression inside of the parentheses, and then your body of the loop, where all of the looping code happens. And then afterwards, we're just gonna go ahead and add ourselves a console.log so we can see that the loop has terminated. So looping has ended. We are now running normal code. All right, so we'll just have that there for us. Now, as I said, unlike a for loop where you could create your counter here, separate it by a colon. Oops, that was kind of weird. Autocomplete. So you've got yourself a counter, and then we could have a colon, and then we would have the condition right here, and then we would have the incrementor right there, and it would take care of it for us. Well, in the world of while loops, it doesn't care about a counter and it doesn't care about an incrementer, because with a while loop you can do pretty much anything you want as long as you have a condition that will eventually turn to false so that you can break out of the loop and you don't end up with an infinite loop that breaks your program. Here though, we're going to go ahead and define it. So let counter equals 0. So I'm going to put the counter outside. I'm in total control of that instead of it belonging to the for loop, or in this case the while loop. The while loop doesn't care. And then I need some kind of a condition. So I've got a counter, and then I'm going to need something to compare it against. So let's say let num times to run, and I determine this. How many times do I want it to run? I want it to run 5 times. And then down here, my condition, of course, is the check to see if I've reached the requirements. So I'm going to say counter, if counter is less than num times to run, then I want this loop to execute. So if that equates to true, let's go ahead and run the loop. If it doesn't, then let's break out and continue running our program as normal. So let's do a console.log, and let's say, let's log the counter, and we'll do what we did in our for loop before, just so we can see how this is all working out. And then we'll do num times to run. Now, if you'll notice, I'm not doing anything to change the counter. So when I run this, what we should end up with is a infinite loop that keeps going on forever. As you can see right here, it's just going and going and going and going, and you can see right here it hasn't stopped. Now if I was to let this just keep going, we're going to end up with Visual Studio, or this Visual Studio Code or Visual Code. We're going to end up with it crashing. So I'm going to go ahead and stop it right there. Let's stop that infinite loop, and you can see the counter never changed because it's always 0, and 0 is always less than 5. Therefore, it's just going to keep going forever. And we don't want that to happen because that's our infinite loop that would break our application. So we're just going to go ahead and make sure that anytime we use a while, we need to realize that no matter what our condition check is, we have to use something that we've provided. The while loop doesn't do anything for us other than check this condition and then execute the code if the condition is true. So we need to do something within our while loop to stop it from happening. So let's kind of follow the same suit as we did with a for loop, and let's just do plus plus on the counter to increment it by 1. And let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have it run 5 times, because right here we're doing it off of 0 based, and we're using less than rather than less than or equal to. So we end up with 5 executions, which is exactly what we needed to have happen. And we did that with the counter plus plus. Now, one crazy thing here is that because we're in control of the counter, we can do all kinds of crazy things if we wanted to. We could say counter plus equals, let's do counter equals counter plus 2 instead of 1. So let's go ahead and execute this now. And it only ran 3 times. And that is because instead of only incrementing by 1 each time, we're incrementing by 2. And it starts out at 0, increment by 2, increment by 4. So here, based on different conditions inside of your while loop, you can actually have your counter increment by more than 1 or just by 1, or you can have all kinds of stuff happen inside of a while loop. So let's just keep in mind that when we're dealing with while loops, we are in control of the counter as well as what we are checking against. And we are responsible for making sure that we change whatever it is in the condition that needs to change in order for it to eventually equate to false so that we can break out of the loop and we don't end up with an infinite loop. So again, your condition is composed of things that you provide. It doesn't have to be a counter, and it doesn't have to be a number of times to run. It can be any kind of a condition that equates to true or false. And to exemplify that, let's go ahead and let's do this. Let's say counter, let's change that to a text, to a string. And we'll start out with an empty string. And then down here, let's say times to run, let's change it to this is the necessary text to stop the looping. And each time we're down here, if we wanted to, we could say the counter equals counter plus, and then we could do num times to run, and then we could do something on a string like slice, and then we could pull out some substring, and then we could slowly turn counter into this string over time, and then it would eventually terminate. So that's kind of a crazy example. Or we could have our condition based on something that is static. So instead of number of times to run, we could just do counter, and let's go ahead and put our counter plus plus back in here. And then we could just go ahead and say 10 times right here, and then go ahead and execute it. Oh, we got an error. It's because we've got our number of times to run. So let's go ahead and fix that really quick. Go ahead and run it. And now we see we've executed it 10 times. Ah, isn't that interesting? We started out with an empty string, but when we incremented it, it changed it into an integer, and we still ended up running the loop the way it's supposed to. JavaScript. Crazy. Does some cool stuff for us. And some stuff that might cause bugs if you're not careful. All right, now we've got to go on 0 to 9, which means we ran it 10 times. So while loops, extremely useful so long as you know what your condition is, you're doing a conditional check, and that you are modifying something in your condition to make sure that your while loop terminates. And for a quick example, just so you can see that it actually doesn't have to be a check like this, what we can do is we can just say let condition Now I'm just calling it condition. I'm going to say equals true. And I'm just going to be checking this variable to see if it's true. And if it's true, I'm just going to go ahead and run the code. So we'll see right here, I'm going to end up with an infinite loop. So let's go ahead and start it. Oh, I got an error because counter isn't defined. So let's do condition. Let's get rid of this stuff just so we can see what the condition is. Let's go ahead and run it. And now I've got myself an infinite loop that's writing true all the time. So we're going to go ahead and stop that before it crashes everything. So as long as it's true, this thing's just going to keep running, keep running, keep running. Let's add something like this to it. Inside loop, just so we know that this is coming from inside the loop. Let's run it again. Again, it's going to be an infinite loop, which will eventually break everything. So let's go ahead and stop that script. You'll see that we have to do something in here to control this condition. Let's change this to false and see what happens. Debug start. You'll see that the loop actually never runs. And that is because in a while loop, the condition gets checked first before the body of the while loop gets executed. Because this was false, this body never was run, therefore we don't have an output from it, and we go directly to the rest of our application, which ends up being a single console.log. So let's go back and let's see what we have to do in order to make sure that eventually our condition changes to false at some point. So if I do this, we should see that this runs only once. In other words, we loop only once. So let's start the debugger. Yep, we got it right here. It's printed out one time because it was true. And then we change the condition to false. The next time it gets checked, it's false. So we break out and we continue with our application. Now this is pretty pointless because it really just does it once. But maybe we've got something going on in here where if something specific happens, then we change the condition to false. So here we would have some kind of if, some other condition would be in here, and then that condition would then determine whether or not we turn this to false. So maybe it's if we're iterating over a repetitive task and we're checking something externally and we find out that we've done it enough times, then we would change it to false. Or maybe if we're iterating over a list of data and we're looking for a specific piece of data, we might do some kind of a check in here where it's if data or current data that we have, current data equals some value that we're looking for, then maybe because we found the one we wanted, we're going to go ahead and stop the looping and then move on and only use the one we found. Those are some examples of where you might use it. If you're at all confused by while loops, make sure you talk to the instructor, visit with the tutors, and do some Google searching if you need some more help on while loops. Make sure you rewatch this video a couple times so that you completely understand how while loops work.